this is a post office. And this is a raw mail delivery office. And here is the strike.
Apparently, both the post office and the delivery office are parts of the UK postal system, but they are run by two separate companies. Why, and what's the stories behind them? In this episode, let's explore this problem. In most countries, you can find the logo of the official postal service company at the frontage of a post office. For example, at the US Post Office, we can find USPS. At the Chinese Post Office, there is China Post, and India Post, La Poste of France, Deutsche Post, Canada Post, and so on. But in the UK, you cannot find the Royal Mail logo at a UK post office. The post office has its own logo. And why? A short answer is that the post office became independent from the Royal Mail Group back in 2012. So there's no way that they use the logo of Royal Mail. But this is not the whole picture. I searched some historical photos of some post offices, and I read this book, which was published in 2011, so before the independence of the post office. And it seems that the post office never used the logo of Royal Mail. And for quite a long time, the post office had its own logo. Only the one used between 1975 to 1993 used the same font as the Royal Mail one. To some extent, the Royal Mail and the post office have always been separate. This problem has confused me for a while, and I did some research, and now I'm still not 100% clear. And let me just share what I learned, but feel free to correct me or add some information in the comment section. And also, I will leave all the related links in the description. To learn more about Royal Mail and post office, let's start from the very beginning of their history. If you go to the Royal Mail Wikipedia page, you can find that Royal Mail was founded in 1516, and in 2016, Royal Mail issued a set of stamps to celebrate its 500th anniversary. And in 1516, Henry VIII of England appointed Sir Brian Tuke as Master of the Posts. The position was later known as Postmaster General and lasted for more than 450 years. What happened in 1516 was the postal service became an official thing. Before that, the royal appointed some messengers to carry letters for the government, and private individuals had to make their own arrangements. And the official post service was called Royal Mail because it was just for the royal and the government, not for the public. In 1603, at the Union of the Crowns, James VI of Scotland and James I of England established the Royal Postal Service between London and Edinburgh in an attempt to remain control over Scotland. And in 1635, Charles I opened the postal service to the public. Postage was paid by the recipient and was dependent on the distance traveled, and the recipient could choose to refuse the letter. Sounds odd to modern people, and that continued until the invention of the penny black. If you are familiar with some British history, you must know Charles I. 7 years after the change of the postal service, the English Civil War started, and another 7 years later, Charles I has been executed, and the monarchy was once abolished. A short-lived Commonwealth of England was established. It was a chaotic period in the history of Britain. In 1660, the eldest surviving son of Charles I, Charles II, came back to London, and the monarchy was restored. The restored kingdom had quite few things to restore, such as the postal system. And following an Act of Parliament under Charles II, the General Letter Office was established, and later it became the General Post Office, or the GPO. So, 1660 is seen as the beginning of the post office, but the GPO at that time was a government department, not quite a modern post office like today. It was the GPO of England, and following the two Acts of Union, postal service across Scotland, England and Wales unified in 1711, and Ireland follows in 1808. In 1661, the first date stamp or postmark was introduced by then Postmaster General Henry Bishop because of complaint about the delay to the mail. And the Bishop's mark was also the first postmark in the world. You can see planks like this around Bank Station in London today. And from this plank, you can see the General Letter Office or similar department seems to have existed during the so-called Republic period. In early days, postal services were limited. Almost all letters were sent via London, and not until late 17th centuries, more postal towns were established other than London, and letters were taken to letter-receiving houses, and later they were increasingly referred as to post offices. From 1784, mail coaches became a familiar sign across the country. The words Royal Mail were on the coaches. The mail coaches were predecessors of mail vans and Royal Mail trucks we can see today. From early days, Royal Mail referred to the mail transportation and delivery services, not the post office counter services. But it was certain that both the post office counters and Royal Mail were controlled by the General Post Office. And the GPO was much more than a department of postal services. And from the 19th century, and the GPO started to control the telegraph, telephone, and even the radio. So they tried to monopolize all the communication industry. And in 1861, they opened their own banking services. But obviously, they could not have a monopoly on this forever. And even in 1969, the GPO was dissolved. Before we move to the next phase of the history, let's go to check out some historical sites of the GPO.
Here we are, General Letter Office from 1653 to 1666, and the first postmarks were struck in 1661, like this. And here is exit number 1 of Bank Station. My least favorite tube station. St. Martin's Le Grand, and somewhere not far from Bank Station. And here was another historical site of the General Post Office. Oh, here's a period box. Oh, we got some information here. This post box was unveiled in 2016 to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the first master of the post. And the building that this post box is now situated outside was the General Post Office headquarters from 1894 to 1984, and the earlier GPO building was located outside this site from 1829 to 1912. Should be somewhere there. This tube station was called Post Office until 1937, and now it is called St. Paul's after the cathedral. I wish it is still called Post Office.
Following the Post Office Act 1969, the General Post Office was transferred from a government department to a statutory corporation, and the corporation was known as the Post Office Group. The word General was dropped, and also the position of Postmaster General was abolished. But the telecommunications was still under the control of the Post Office until the British Telecommunications Act in 1981. So the BT Group we know today was actually a part of the Post Office. In 1986, the post office was organized into 3 separate businesses, and roll mail letters, roll mail parcels, and post office counters. So 1986 is seen as the founding year of the present Post Office Limited. And the roll mail parcels was rebranded as Parcel Force in 1990 and Parcel Force Worldwide in 1998. And in 1997, the Labour government decided to keep the post office state-owned but more commercial freedom. And this led the Postal Services Act 2000, whereby the post office became a public limited company. And in early 2001, the group was renamed as Consignia. It was a bad name, and because it was very unpopular, the name only lasted for 15 months and changed to Roll Mail Group. So it looks like that the post office group became the Roll Mail Group with Consignia as a transition. A further change was made following the Postal Service Act 2011. This act allowed for up to 90% of the roll mail to be privatized, with at least 10% of the shares to be held by the employees. And this act also led the independence of post office 1 year later. Today, the Post Office Limited is still government owned. And in 2015, the UK government sold its remaining shares of the roll mail, ending the 499 years of state ownership. So today, the roll mail doesn't have a lot of real connections except the name, the logo, and they have to follow some rules such as to keep the monarch's head on the stamps. And of course, they are working closely with the post office. That's the story. So post office counter services and roll mail seem to have always been separated, but in a long period of time, they belong to the same government department or a group company. Now, there are 2 separate companies working closely together. And today, if you send a mail via post office, you use both the services of post office and roll mail. The post office staff will firstly process your item, and then roll mail staff will collect your letter and transfer to the sorting office, then to the destination delivery office, and finally to the recipient. But if you drop a letter to a post box and you just use the service of roll mail, because all the post boxes are belonging to the roll mail. As a stamp collector, I'm curious about who is considered the stamp issuer and responsible for the philatelic bureau. And today it is definitely roll mail, and roll mail is also the designated operator of the Universal Postal Union, or UPU. But how was it before? And I can find some clues in my collections because I got quite a few first covers of different stages of the history. And for example, I got this one, this first cover, the first ever Machins, and in 1967 you can see a GPO first cover. And later we have post office first cover. And in 1980s, it became roll mail first cover. And I also got a welding stamp booklet. And you can see the GPO logo. And this one was issued in 1950s. And I also got a stamp of the GPO. I'm not sure what was it used for. It's clear that before 1969, the stamp was considered to be issued by the GPO. More clues was found from the pictures online, and the GPO was officially dissolved on 1st October 1969. So before 1st October, there were still booklets with the GPO logo, and there were GPO posters and GPO first covers. And on 1st October, a set of stamps same British post office technology was issued. You can see the presentation pack and post office British mint stamps, and the first cover, post office first cover. For example, I got a 1977 Christmas presentation pack, and here it says Post Office Philatelic Bureau. I found a picture of booklet which was issued in November 1969, and there were no GPO logo anymore, just a crown. But when did it switch from post office to real mail? It wasn't in early 2000 and is a little bit complex. From 1975, booklets with the words real mail stamp were issued, but all the definitive and commemorative first covers and presentation packs said post office. And an interesting thing was in 1980. There were a lot of philatelic items issued for the 1980 International Stamp Exhibition, and we got real mail booklets and post office first covers and presentation packs. But from 1982, the commemorative first covers and presentation packs switched to real mail, but the definitive ones were still post office. And in 1983, the definitive first covers and presentation packs finally switched to real mail. Similar things happened on the post boxes too. The new ones say real mail, and the older ones, even the Victorian ones, say post office. But it's hard to find the unveil date of a post box. And I'm also curious about who was the designated operator of the UPU back in 1970s to 1980s. But I didn't find any references about it. And so the story is from 1970s to 1980s, the stamp issuer and the Philatelic Bureau switched from post office to real mail. That's what I found about the post office and real mail. Hope you enjoyed it. And during the research, I learned a lot of British history, such as different acts. And also I can find some clues from my collections, which was such a joy. Before the end, I have to mention something that happened just as I was making this video. Do you remember the footage of the real mail strike? It was filmed on 8 September 2022. On that day, Queen Elizabeth II died. She was the symbol of the UK, had always been there, but it was so sudden she passed. It was end of an era, and a lot of things will be changed. In a very small aspect, the real mail strike was planned on 8th and 9th September, but they stopped after 8th. I can prove that they worked on 9th because I received this postcard from the Great American Stamp Show by Exploring Stamps. Thank you, Graham. And I stamped a date by myself. And this is my first postcard received during Charles III's reign. It's definitely a new era for the philatelic world. The Queen is the human appeared on most postage stamps, and I'm sure in the future there will be more stamps issued to commemorate her life. I ordered this set of stamps. I am not a big fan of Transformers, but this set of stamps are the last set issued during the Queen's reign, and it was issued on 1st of September. Barcode date matchings? I think there will be no more, just dates. How about the future? What will Charles III stamps look like? And what will the new post boxes and rule ciphers like? Let's wait and see. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe and follow me on social media if you haven't. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Rest in the peace, Your Majesty.